Hello, thank you for watching. I put these videos out about once a week, and I know that as we go through spring, the calendar, we just flip to April. As we get into May and then June, there is a seasonality to it. There will likely be less weather to discuss, at least less rainfall events, inclement weather. There's kind of this predictable lull that we get in many locations across the West region, certainly for California and some other states during the summer months. And you can see that here. This is a graphic of the average annual rainfall for Anaheim, California. Now that average accrual, that is the smoother black line kind of running through the middle here throughout the whole year. What we've received this year is above that blue shading. And that shaded blue, because that's all the anomalously positive rainfall that we've seen this year in Anaheim. That goes back to last year as well. That dotted line is 2023. That's just from last year. If you combine all the rain we've had in Southern California, parts of Los Angeles, with 23 and then now in 2024, it's one of the rainiest 2-year stretches that we've had in Southern California in quite some time, going back to some very old historical records since that was kept in the area. Now, you can see in that accrual that we kind of pick up a lot of that rainfall here in spring, the kind of second half of our water year. But as we get into late April and May, that hose shuts off. There's much less events to talk about. Now, that's just the average over the last 30 years, but even if you look at the last 5 years, which we do have kind of plotted on those harder to see lines, you can see that that last kind of big event of the year typically occurs around this kind of time of the year. Last year, things shut off kind of in late March, early April. We had one more event in early May. Similar kind of situation in 2019, but in the years prior to that, and just a little bit after, a lot of those last events right around late March or early April. Now, as we get into the forecast, I think we have a little bit more rain to talk about, certainly in Southern California and some other areas, but we could be seeing here over the next week or two one of the last kind of main events that we'll have to talk about for quite some time, maybe till we get into the next water year, well down the road into September and October of 2024. This kind of pattern or shape holds true maybe to a lesser extent, but even across other areas in the western region. If I pick on Lebanon, Oregon here, you see they're accruing rainfall a little bit later into the spring, but they have their lull, their summer shut off, if you will, as we go into July, August, parts of September before it picks up again. We jump a little bit further east to Ontario, Oregon. That's on totally the other side of the state near the border of Idaho. Maybe even lesser of that kind of same smoothing pattern over summer. And here you can see we've had anomalous rainfall even up into Idaho this year. But we do get a break, kind of a lull in that precipitation. You can see some of these long stretches from years prior where we didn't have rainfall as you go through June, July, even into August a bit, before we pick up again, right at the end of the year and the beginning of the next water year. One location that doesn't maybe have that same phenomenon, maybe is even in the kind of inverse, is if you get east of the Continental Divide. That's when you start pulling up some of that Gulf moisture. There's some latent continental moisture as well. And really, if you go somewhere like the Great Falls area of northwestern Montana, that's when they get some of their thunderstorms, is in June and July, maybe even late May, where they pick up a good portion of their precipitation budget in that kind of convective thunderstorm fashion. And that's why as you get into the summer months, actually they're getting quite a bit of rainfall in that time period. In fact, if they miss out on some of this, you can see some years prior, they got a lot of rainfall in that short window here with some of these quick events here. So if they were to miss out on some of this rainfall here, they're actually not getting a lot kind of in the traditional water year we think of, for California. So a little bit different of a situation just as you get east of the divide based on the weather patterns there. But wanted to share that, kind of interesting. We're going to be getting close in some areas, certainly for California, parts of Arizona, to that shutoff here as we get further toward April. Looking backwards, this is looking at the last 90 days of precipitation anomalies. A lot going on this map, but one thing is clear, that for areas along the coast and some of these coastal valleys here, it has been wet to start the year. One area where it's been dry is the Northern Cascades. We've talked about that, and the Northern Rockies in the interior. So the Salmon River Mountains of Idaho and the Bitterroot Range here. These two areas combined are where we're a little bit concerned about drought going forward through the summer, maybe even spreading out a little bit. And that's just because the snowpack hasn't been what we've kind of wanted it to be. That can be an El Nino correlation as well. But the forecast for more heat and potentially drought development in the kind of northern west as we go through the summer here. This is an area we'll keep an eye on. Other areas out west, though, we can just kind of walk through a number of different cities, all showing above average precipitation, at least through this point in 2024. Catching us up to present day here, this is the current satellite imagery, visible satellite looking down in the eastern Pacific, the western maybe third of the United States here. You can see the coastline there. And it's maybe kind of obvious what's capturing my attention here. If we look off the coast of Oregon and Washington, we can see a low pressure system spinning here, some clouds swirling around that center in that counterclockwise fashion. This looks similar. I'm kind of getting deja vu of the beginning of, I think, my video last Wednesday, where we had a very similarly placed low pressure system kind of diving toward the southeast. So in fact, the forecast going forward is going to look similar, I think, to what we saw at the end of last week. These systems have been getting a little bit less potent. This one's coming even more kind of out of the north. You can see that trajectory if you watch really closely. The clouds coming more like this rather than maybe one of these more potent Pacific systems coming in like this. As a result, I think it will have two characteristics. One, less precipitation to talk about for maybe some areas along the coast, less flooding concerns. We are expecting measurable precipitation out of this, but maybe not as big of a precip or snow conversation as what we were having earlier in the year. But I think because of that northward trajectory, I was just kind of drawing that out. Probably looking at colder temperatures associated with this one for some sensitive areas. So we'll discuss frost risk associated with it as well. Look at the upper level wind speeds here. You can make out the jet stream here running along the kind of northern Pacific here up through Alaska and diving down into the trough that we just looked at just off the coast of Oregon and Washington here. So this is the system that we're watching this weekend. This trough is going to move south and east and then further out of the area as we go through the weekend and into early next week. But this is going to be the big weather maker to talk about as we go through the next kind of 3 to 4 days here. That weather is already being made here. So this is looking down at the radar presentation across the northwestern U.S. here, maybe the kind of corner of the country here toward the northwest. Really what's catching my eye here, a little bit of rain showers maybe here in Northern California, some snow in higher elevations. The same goes for southeastern Oregon. You can see these spotty showers here looking a little bit different than what we've seen, I think, this year in parts of the Northwest. These are more convective in nature and probably looking at some thunderstorms trying to develop here in western Idaho and eastern Oregon. If we maybe take a closer look from the Boise radar here, you can see some of these a little bit stronger, higher reflectivity values, thunderstorms here. And again, there's the border between Oregon and Idaho. Some of these a little bit stronger. Can't rule out some weak hail with some of these, maybe some smaller hail, especially these here in the Treasure Valley. Something to keep an eye on here as we go through the day. The Storm Prediction Center has a marginal risk for severe weather for western Idaho and southeastern Oregon. That isn't the most aggressive risk they could forecast here. In fact, it's kind of a 1 out of 5 on their scale. Maybe not even as strong as some other storms we're watching today in Florida and Virginia. But nonetheless, they are on the scoreboard here in terms of a 1 out of 5 risk, and that's mainly for wind and hail. So can't rule out a damaging wind gust and maybe some weak or small hail here as we go through the evening hour. If we kind of focus on that area here, I'll take a look. This is the 3-kilometer NAM model. I'm showing this one because it has higher resolution, so it's able to peer into those thunderstorms a little bit more. As I make this forecast valid for Wednesday evening, see storms potentially through eastern Oregon all the way into kind of the dinner hour and just a little bit afterwards before clearing out overnight tonight as we go toward midnight. If I take this forecast into the future here, you can see that low pressure system sneaking down toward the coast of California, getting out into Thursday morning with rain showers picking up in the Sacramento Valley. We get snow showers here in the Sierra Nevadas, rain showers along the coast of California and the Bay Area. And again, this is Thursday morning with perhaps a little bit of rain shower activity pushing into the Willamette Valley and eastern Washington here through the day on Thursday. Take this forecast into Friday. You can see some of that shower activity extending down along the coast of California, trying to get into Southern California and San Diego as we get into the day on Friday. Idaho, now that rain shower is trying to be replaced with some snow showers here, even trying to sneak in to the Snake River Valley, probably mixed with little snow accumulation, but nonetheless, things turning colder here in a big way as we go through the weekend, and we're going to expect some temperature drops associated with that. If I jump over and show you the National Weather Service, their all hazards map, a lot of the beige color you can see here in the interior, those are high wind warnings and advisories and watches, all for wind along the interior as that trough pushes into the area over the weekend. The purple color here along the Sierra Nevadas and the transverse ranges, those are winter weather advisories, so expecting additional snowfall for the Sierra Nevadas. Some of the transverse ranges, this includes winter storm warnings. Get more into the southern ranges here east of Los Angeles and north of San Diego. So expecting some snow out of these, not as much as we've seen with some of the storm systems earlier this year, just being a winter weather advisories in the Sierra rather than that winter storm warning. Do have some winter storm watches in northwest Ontario and northeastern Oregon to keep an eye on as well. I want to jump over, this is the ECMWF precipitation forecast going through the weekend here. Doesn't have that same, maybe the high resolution that we were looking at with the 3-kilometer NAM, but it is going to take us through the weekend and then give us some idea of what we might be dealing with next week. I'll make this valid here Wednesday evening, and it looks similar, I think, to that radar presentation I just showed you earlier. Spotty showers and thunderstorms here, again in the lower Snake and eastern Idaho area or eastern Oregon, I should say. Just some weak shower activity in the Willamette Valley here this afternoon in Northern California. So take this forecast through Thursday. You can see that low pressure system trying to make landfall in northern and central California, bringing rainfall around midday to the Bay Area, Sacramento Valley, maybe some light precip trying to work into the San Joaquin Valley. As I take this forecast into Friday proper, that's when we're expecting the precipitation to pick up more in Southern California, including perhaps parts of the Central California coast and the San Joaquin Valley, with some lingering light snow showers along the Sierra Nevadas. See some snow activity here in eastern Oregon and parts of the upper elevations in Idaho, with, again, mixed precipitation trying to get into the Snake River Valley, but probably not seeing too much measurable accumulations. Take this forecast into Saturday. You can see that system trying to get east of the divide here, bringing some snow showers to the Great Falls area that we just talked about and parts of northwest Montana. A little bit of a sneaker system coming in behind this one, impacting parts of the Willamette Valley and western Washington on Saturday evening, getting into Sunday here. I take this forecast into Sunday and then Monday. Now you can see all this activity trying to clear out of the area slowly. Some lingering showers here in the interior of the Las Vegas area as we go through the day on Monday. Take the forecast even beyond that, kind of the 6 to 7 day forecast at this point. See big clearing as we go through the work week next week. So kind of similar, again, like I mentioned last week, inclement weather to talk about going into the weekend, some colder temperatures, and then this kind of clearing out in the week ahead. So as we go through Monday and then Tuesday, Wednesday of next week, April 10th, I think we're going to be slowly clearing out the weather and then warming up those temperatures as well as that trough exits to the east and we get a ridge moving in from the west. If we look at precipitation totals here, this is through Monday evening from the ECMWF, so the same model that I just showed you, but looking at the final precipitation values. Anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. And folks, for here in the Central Valley, higher amounts, potentially getting closer to an inch, maybe just a little bit over that for areas along the Central California coast. Lesser so here along the Southern California coastline. Again, looking at maybe a 1/4 inch, can't rule out something like a 1/2 inch with higher amounts here in the upper elevation, some of that falling as snowfall, and that would include the Sierra Nevadas as well. Some higher values here, certainly, again, for the same areas that we talked about in western Idaho, eastern Oregon. One, because of some of the thunderstorms that are moving through now, but additional rain showers and mixed precipitation trying to move into this area really through the weekend if you look closely at some of those precipitation forecasts going forward. And that includes parts of northwest Montana. This is an area, right, we just talked about maybe being a little bit concerned for areas up here for drought development. Not a bad thing that they're getting some precipitation into there. I'm going to jump ahead and look at the 7-day snowfall totals, just to get an idea of what we're talking about there. Good helping here, again, on the Sierra Nevadas, not the strongest, maybe blizzard that we've seen earlier this year, but can't rule out something like a foot or maybe even closer to 2 feet in some of the highest elevations here along the Sierra Nevadas. Looking at additional snowfall improvements here along the elevations of Idaho. Not a ton here, unfortunately, in the northern Cascades, but the southern Cascades seeing somewhere around a foot of snowfall. Where we're seeing a lot of snow, but not necessarily at upper elevations, is in northwest Montana here. So the Golden Triangle area here, Great Falls, up toward the Canadian border, looking anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of snow, depending on how all things shake out as we go through the weekend here and this trough exits the area. I don't think this is a bad thing in terms of getting some more moisture up into here as we go through what could be a little bit of a hotter and drier summer here for folks in the north and northwest. Now, I mentioned, I think last week, that a piece of this conversation would be the temperature conversation. So if I take this and make this valid as of Thursday morning here, these are the National Weather Service, their forecast for overnight low temperatures. Now, Thursday, kind of going into Friday, not looking at the coldest temperatures, I think, of the weekend. As I take this into Friday morning, you can see the temperatures dropping toward 40 degrees Fahrenheit here in the Central Valley, near the 50s in Southern California and Southern Arizona. Colder on Saturday morning as temperatures drop into the lower 40s here for Southern California and folks here in Southern Arizona. This includes some areas here, even along the coast, getting down into the 40s. Some of the valleys here, maybe the upper 30s. And if you look here in the Central Valley of California, down to 41 in the Sacramento Valley, 37 there, and then down to 40 as we go through the San Joaquin Valley. So this is getting a little bit toward frost territory, at least from the National Weather Service. Not seeing what I would call, a bona fide frost forecast or certainly a freeze, but getting a little bit close for comfort here before warming up as we go into the next work week. Getting a different opinion here. This is from the ECMWF, so not the National Weather Service forecast, but the ECMWF modeled low temperature forecast for Saturday morning, which seems to be right now the coldest morning that we'll be dealing with from this event for folks in California and Arizona. Their forecast getting a little bit closer, 33 degrees Fahrenheit for Fresno, 38 degrees Fahrenheit for Bakersfield, upper 30s, lower 40s for folks in the Sacramento Valley area. This is getting, again, concerningly close to a frost and freeze. And given that we're, still 78 hours out, this is something that bears watching, because if it moves just in a few degrees lower direction in terms of a forecast update, now we're talking about a freeze or a frost warning, and something that bears a little bit more concern given that we're all the way out into early April here. So we've avoided these up to now, despite being on the cooler side to start the year for various weeks. So something to keep an eye on here. Again, not seeing a home run frost forecast, but it's getting close enough to merit a little bit of a concern as we go through the weekend here. If I take that forecast into Sunday morning, you can see those temperatures warming up into the lower 40s. And I think once we get to that point, we're now looking back a little bit warmer temperatures as we go through the week next week. And then finally out toward next week and getting quite a bit warmer for some of those same areas. GFS just getting another different opinion here, because we are seeing some different numbers. This is a different forecast, 41 for Bakersfield and 37 on Saturday morning as those coldest temperatures. So not as cold as the ECMWF, more in line with the National Weather Service, which I think is good news. We have two forecasts, right, showing a little bit warmer temperatures, but that ECMWF forecast showing closer to a frost or freeze event has me at least a little bit concerned. If we change things around, this is not looking at an absolute forecast, but an anomaly forecast. So the colors here representing are colder than average or warmer than average. And this is kind of a rolling one-day look at that. So take this through Friday and then into Saturday. Again, that's those cold temperatures pushing into California, parts of Nevada, parts of southwestern Arizona. Again, associated with that cold temperature risk we talked about in the Central Valley. So push through the day on Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday. See those colder temperatures exiting with the trough toward the east, toward the Four Corners area. This is out into Tuesday now. As we get into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, temperatures now warming up across the board, across the western region, getting out toward the end of the next work week. So the warm-up is coming, and the drier weather coming at the kind of as we get into the next work week next week. Another way to kind of look at that is the trough and ridge pattern. I'll make this valid here as of Wednesday evening. And there's the trough that we were just looking at earlier. We talked about the jet stream going up and over the Pacific Ocean, diving down into a trough off the coast of Washington and Oregon. So make this forecast go through the day here on Wednesday evening, Thursday, and now into Saturday morning. You can see that trough pushing across southwestern portions of the U.S., bringing those frost temperature concerns to California, and then exiting off toward the east. There's that system I talked about moving through the Willamette Valley on Sunday, just kind of a quick hitting system there that tries to push into the area, but quickly being replaced as we go out into the work week next week by an upper level ridge that will change the pattern around to warmer and drier as we get out into the next work week. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center's forecast over that same time period, that 6 to 10 day outlook, so looking through the next work week, there's the influence of that upper level ridge versus the trough that we saw this weekend. That upper level ridge bringing in warmer temperatures. If we make this forecast not for precipitation, or not for temperature, I should say, but precipitation, you can see that drier signal here getting a little bit more potent here for folks in California, Nevada, Idaho, and southeastern Oregon. If I make this forecast valid, and I'm going to take this a little bit out into next weekend here. So this is April 12th, 13th, and now the 14th. We still see that persistent ridge pattern across the western U.S. Now, a lot of these videos that I made this year, we have that warm-up, right, to talk about as we go through the work week. But by the time I'm making that next forecast video, maybe on Wednesday evening, we've come into view of the next system to talk about, very kind of similar to what I've talked about here. So I've been looking out into next week to see if that cadence is going to continue. And we do see a trough here modeled on some of these long-range forecasts. This, again, all the way out into Saturday of next week. But even this one here is still a little bit further offshore to where we're going to be affecting our weekend next weekend, expecting warmer temperatures maybe to persist through next weekend. I could take the forecast a little bit beyond this, but this is really kind of beyond the range of something where we'd put too much confidence in, but at least some sense of maybe another trough to talk about getting well out into even beyond next weekend. Not enough confidence here to say, have any high confidence in that forecast right now. I think the good news here is drying out and warming up next week, that perhaps continuing through that next weekend may be something to keep an eye on as we persist even beyond that. If you look at the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, this is getting us into next weekend here. You can see that warm temperature signal continuing from the Climate Prediction Center, consistent with that ridge sticking around that I just showed you on that forecast, the slide before. If you look at their precipitation outlook, slightly above average precipitation signal here as we get into that next week and then even into that next week a little bit. I don't, totally disagree with this kind of slightly above average because we did see that hint of a trough off the coast that could bring some moisture into this area. But, not, nearly the highest value you could see in terms of the forecast here. So just something to keep an eye on as we get into the next week. I think for folks in California, Nevada, Arizona, some areas here with that seasonality that I talked about at the beginning of the video, could be looking at, the weekend here, that last, serious, meaningful rainfall event until, potentially the start of the next water year or thunderstorm or monsoon thunderstorm as we go through the summer here. We'll talk about that in the next video here. Let's kind of finish up here. The MJO becoming less of a conversation here as we get into summer, but we are seeing some hints that it might try to get back into the Pacific here, out kind of in that same time period we're looking at, out toward next weekend. If it does get all the way out here, that might increase the chances we do get a wet pattern returning to some areas along the West Coast. Too far out to talk specifics here, but this is at least consistent with this pattern I showed you here in that 8 to 14 day outlook. It's something to keep an eye on as we get into next week and then even beyond the weekend of that. And the week after that, I should say. If we get sea surface temperatures here, we've been watching these for an El Nino weakening and a La Nina growth in the eastern Pacific. Now, El Nino are these warm sea surface temperatures here in the central tropical Pacific. Those have weakened some, certainly over the last few months, but if we look closely here, they're certainly warmer than average, even have some higher values here, kind of further over on the color bar. So El Nino has hung around. It hasn't weakened very quickly going into April. In fact, if you go back even into maybe the videos from February or early March, I talked about could we rapidly weaken by the end of April or early May into a La Nina? And at least, right now, just not seeing it. We do have these colder temperature anomalies over here in the far eastern Pacific, but at least as of yet, they haven't extended too far into the central tropical Pacific. While these warm waters persist, we're still in an El Nino, and that has been the case here as we went through March. In fact, if we look at the El Nino indices, these measure those ocean temperature anomalies in the central tropical Pacific. If you look really since the holidays, we've been weakening that El Nino very slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it has been decreasing that moving average there. But really over the last 2 weeks, we've had a little bit of resurgence here now. I don't think we're going to warm back up into a strong El Nino, but we aren't seeing this kind of rapid drop off and a quick transition into La Nina. This might be something to watch. If there's a slower transition to La Nina, like there was a slower transition to El Nino last summer, that could have forecast implications as we go through the end of summer and then into the next water year. Just something to keep an eye on here, not seeing that rapid drop off and weakening of El Nino like there was some concern for. We'll talk about that as we get into the video next week, maybe look at a monsoon forecast as we get into that, as we know more about where El Nino and La Nina is going. I want to thank you all for watching. Until next week, have a great weekend.